Just very briefly, a little bit about the speakers today. I'm Hamish. I'm the CEO at Excipient. We are a regulatory affairs consultancy for China. I'm a lawyer by training, qualified in Sydney, Australia, and Hong Kong, where I'm speaking to you today. Ning, are you there? Would you like to also introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Hamish. My name is Ning Guo. I'm the general manager and joined Excipient since 2008, 15 years ago. And it's my pleasure to share our latest experience with China DMF registration with you.
Okay. Matthew.
Hi, thanks, Hamish. I'm Matthew Jensen. I'm an associate partner with Serica. We're a global technology and financial advisory firm, essentially that empowers innovators to leverage the size and scale of the Chinese market to solve the world's biggest problems.
Thank you. Benjamin.
Benjamin here, founder and CEO at Serica. Hamish, thanks very much for having us, and everybody, looking forward to presenting to you later. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about the drug master filing market in China, specifically for APIs, excipients, and packaging. We're going to give you some detail about the registration process as well as the market process. First, I'd just like to quickly present to you our company, Excipient, just so you know where we're coming from. We, as I mentioned, we're a regulatory affairs consultancy for China, also doing testing, product safety certification services, and support. We have around 20 years experience and cover sectors including pharma, medical device, health, and broader healthcare and industrial sectors. I won't go into the detail here. You can read these slides at your leisure, but we have around 100 staff, most on the ground in China. And Ning is the general manager of our Beijing office, our largest office. Here's a brief agenda for today. We're going to talk, Serica is going to talk about the key market points before we go into some detail from a Excipient side in the registration and regulatory overview and framework, before we look in some more detail at some of the key post-market responsibilities and local representative requirements for a China DMF. Then to finish up, we're going to have some further feedback from the Serica team about hot tips for the drug market entry into China. This is a more general overview. We will have a follow-up session in 2 weeks' time on Tuesday, June 6th, at a lunchtime session for European hours, more later evening for China time, where we will have a more select group who can speak in some more detail and even more interactive session where we can answer specific questions and so on. So if you're interested in that, please do sign up at the link here, and that will also be shared with attendees after the session. Spaces are limited because we'd like to make it an intimate and productive session for the follow-up roundtable as well. Okay, so over to you, Matthew, please, to start with the first session about some market overview.
Lovely. Thank you, Hamish. Well, thanks, Hamish. Appreciate the invitation to come and speak with our audience today, and looking forward to the chance to share with you some insights on the opportunities that exist in the Chinese pharma market. So as mentioned, I work for Serica. We are a global technology and financial advisory firm that empowers innovators to leverage the agility and scale of the Chinese market to solve the world's most pressing challenges. So healthcare is always going to be a major part of our mission, and we're always excited at new opportunities to help improve global access to healthcare. Personally, I've been living and working in China for the last 7 years since coming over from the United States, helping foreign companies to connect with and close commercial opportunities that they need to find success in the market. So I'm excited at the prospect of working with some more European companies going forward here. China's healthcare market is the second largest in the world at the moment and should overtake the US to become #1 in the next few years. So today I'll share with you some insights into what makes China such a tantalizing proposition and how you can potentially find success in the market. I think a good entry point is taking a look at the overwhelming scale of China. So as I'm sure most of you know, they have a population of 1.4 billion people. It's increasingly middle class, which means that more and more people have discretionary income every year. In terms of healthcare, in 2021, there was a healthcare expenditure of 1.1 trillion US dollars. So that's a massive spend overall, though you may notice that as a percentage of GDP, it's a fair bit smaller than other countries. For the pharmaceutical market, there's a $570 billion market value in 2021, a very big market. Interestingly, there's 5,000 different individual pharmaceutical manufacturers. And I think really what that speaks to is companies of all size are able to operate in this space, and it's not exclusively dominated by the biggest companies. So though the Chinese market is massive and has certainly overcome a lot in the past few decades, there are still challenges for the healthcare system. Specifically, there's an increasingly aged population. Currently, there's over 280 million people over the age of 60, and that number will continue to rise. There's a huge number of chronic diseases, with many of these patients presenting a real drain on the current healthcare resources. And as we touched on before, there's low spending, especially per capita compared with other countries. The spend compared to the UK, the US, and EU is significantly lower on an individual basis, though it is starting to rise proportionally. Fortunately, the Chinese government is working to overcome these challenges, and a core piece of that is their Healthy China 2030 platform. So in 2016, the government released an omnibus plan with, as you can see, many points focused around improving healthcare services and financial coverage across the country. So there's a lot of little pieces here, but I think the ones that'll be most interesting and important for you in the pharma industry is international reform, which is essentially making the Chinese medical industry in line with international standards, easy to enter and find support, as I'm sure you'll see with this drug master filing process. And the second one is increase in private insurance. Essentially, there's more money to be spent across the board, and you won't exclusively be dealing with government insurance, skimping, and looking for the cheapest options. So these policies from Healthy 2030 have led us into the market today. As mentioned, it's massive. There's a huge spend already. The market is continuing to grow massively. It's expected to triple in the next 15 years. And that healthcare spend, despite the huge value, has room to grow to match the per capita spend of other industrialized nations. So it's big, it's growing, and there's certainly room for further growth. In terms of where that money's coming from, even though 96% of the country is covered by government insurance, increasingly less healthcare payments are coming from the government, and more are coming from medical insurance. As you can see here, personal payments also make up a large proportion, but increasingly spending is coming from insurance. And finally, pharma is big business in China. There remains a significant amount of investment available for pharma companies that are operating within the market. For the healthcare market at large, government support, rises in private insurance and private investment, and significant pressure to improve patient care have all spurred remarkable growth. The pharma industry has been buoyed by these same trends as well. And let's take a look at some of the more specifics on the pharma market itself. As you'd maybe expect, it's huge. It's expected to overtake the USA in the next 5 years. The market's also strong. Nearly a third of new drugs in 2022 were developed or licensed by Chinese companies. It's successful globally, booming around the world. Even on the NASDAQ, it's showing massive growth from some of these IPO'd companies. And most interestingly, it's innovative. So it's first in the world for biotech patents, second in the world for publications. And really what this all speaks to is that China is no longer just about producing low-cost generics or providing raw materials. They are a world-class innovator, and importantly, their consumers demand the newest and best products. So the pharma market as a percentage of the healthcare industry obviously takes the lion's share, responsible for over half of the market value. Interestingly, I think historically, over 30% of all healthcare spending in China is going to medication in the pharma market, just compared with 16% of other nations. So a massive spend proportionately on medications as opposed with other nations. COVID also spurred a health craze among millennials, whose demand for imported medicines rose to a much higher rate than it was previously and has been at any point in the past. The market itself is primarily focused around synthetics and biopharma. As you can see from this graph, traditional Chinese medicine is also a part of the industry, but it's remained relatively stable, especially over the last 5 years. And really where a lot of the growth has been coming from is in biopharmaceuticals. I think really the bottom line from this slide to take away, though, is that China is increasingly spending more money on medication than anywhere else in the world, and they are looking for innovative new products. Now, I think it's important to look at what is driving this growth and opportunity, particularly for international companies like yourselves who are interested in entering the market. First and foremost, regulatory reform. It's easier and faster than it has been previously to get approval to enter the market. There's a greater internationalization. So as China becomes more in line with international regulations, it's increasing the opportunity for countries like yourselves, as I'm sure you'll hear more about from Khasema in regards to this DMF process. Global licensing deals are increasing, meaning that the Chinese market is willing and ready to work more actively with the rest of the world. There's a world-class research and development infrastructure in the market as overseas returnees come home and set up their own CDMO and CRO operations. Certainly a significant amount of capital investment exists in the market, which is available for companies who can find success. And finally, there's been a rise in Chinese pharma innovation. So essentially, it's strengthening the domestic market to match international standards. So really what this has created is a perfect storm of both opportunity and demand within the market. If we're looking at specific areas where China needs help in buoying their pharmaceutical industry, some of them would include chronic diseases. As mentioned, huge population dealing with chronic diseases needs a lot of support, especially ones that aren't going to be cost prohibitive. Oncology, certainly growing as well. Women's health, another growth market. Rare diseases. Within China, there's somewhere between 20 and 50 million individuals suffering from rare diseases, depending on how you measure the statistics. And increasingly over the past few years, China has provided support for orphan medication. So if you are able to provide medications in here, not only is there a large market for it, but also government support is a significant possibility. Supplements, another growing market. Mental health, expect to see a boom in kind of the next 5 to 10 years as psychopharmacology and psychiatry in general gains popularity and prevalence in the Chinese market. And finally, anesthetics. Similarly, as surgery becomes more prevalent, there's going to be an increasing need for anesthetic developments within the Chinese market. So, though it's not to downplay the difficulties, the Chinese pharma market has a huge need for new solutions. But importantly, there is increasingly funding available for them. And for foreign companies who are willing to invest the time, energy, and significant resources that are needed to find success in China, there's opportunity to yield significant rewards. That's not to downplay the difficulties. There's certainly a lot of challenges. It's a different business culture, unfamiliar practices, new regulations, language barriers, obviously. So succeeding in China is not necessarily an easy task. And while there's no silver bullet for finding success in the market, at Serica, we recommend kind of these 4 tips as guiding principles to help increase your odds of success. right? First of which is striving for objectivity. It can be really easy to get overwhelmed by China and the intense background noise. So it's important to stay focused and make informed decisions as opposed to ones that are based on hearsay. Next is being ready to assess your China readiness. And so you need to evaluate whether you can find success and what it will take before entering the market. Thirdly, localize. This is the biggest one. Localize. You'll need to adjust everything from your products to your business practices. If you want to be successful in China, you must be agile and flexible, which can be difficult when coming from different markets. And finally, focus on strong local partnerships. It's easy to think you'll be alone in the market, but there's a lot of great support. Whether it's local chambers of commerce, support from your personal governments, third-party companies like Serica and Casema. There are people here who exist to help you. And the best advice I can give is to work with experts, work with people who understand the market and who can really help guide you through it. So that's my time. Thank you all for your attention. If you're interested in learning more about the Chinese tech space, feel free to check out Serica on LinkedIn. We have a weekly China Tech newsletter, or visit our website for more information. And with that, I'll pass the mic back over to Hamish and Ning, who should share a bit more on the regulatory pathways for entering the market with DMF.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Ning and I are now going to speak in a bit more detail about some of the specific regulatory and practical points, let's go ahead with here. The first point to note is that there's three broad hierarchies in the regulatory system. I won't go into too much detail about it, except to say that for the drugs sector, the key regulatory bodies are at the top level, the State Council, then followed by the SAMR, which has key responsibilities relating to post-market obligations in particular, and the National Medical Products Administration, or NMPA for short, which is the regulator for medical devices, IVDs, pharma, and cosmetics products. The specific department responsible for drugs is the CDE within NMPA. Ning, maybe could you take us through a little bit here about some of the background to the development of the DMF filing for China?
My pleasure, Hamish. And as you can see, we have listed the historical development of the organization and the policy of Chinese authority here. So before 2015, there was such kind of approval system for issue binding review only for excipients and so on. And then the policy has evolved to DMF filing and bundle technical review since 2017. And then in 2020, it's also possible to do independent review for generic API product, only for API, not for excipients and packaging materials. And there's such kind of development from approval system to DMF filing and bundle technical review, and lately to the independent review possible. Hamish?
Thank you. So that's a brief overview about the framework. Now we're just going to speak in more specificity about the drug master filing process for the broad category of APIs, excipients, and packaging. We label the overall category of AEP for short. These, as Ning mentioned, these product categories as part of the drug sector in China have only relatively recently been able to enjoy the drug master filing system, which has various benefits for AEP manufacturers. Here's a overview of the three broad pathways which have developed over the past few years for DMF manufacturers. Ning, perhaps you could take us through in a little bit more detail about each.
Yes, of course. And as you can see, the first pathway is drug dossier. This pathway is still valid for all suppliers of AEP products. So as AP manufacturer or suppliers, you can submit your product information to your customer, who is a drug manufacturer, for their drugs application here in China. So this is still possible if if it is possible for you and to send such information to your customers directly. And this is by far the easiest way for a manufacturer of AEP. But in this way, you cannot protect your intellectual property and confidential information of your product and production process. That was the reason why NMPA had introduced the other two pathways of API independent approval and binding technical review, as I have explained in the previous slide. So API independent approval is only applicable for API products, and if you choose this pathway as an API manufacturer, you can file your DMF, Drug Master Filing, separately, and at last you get an API marketing approval independent from drug application process by yourself. And you can also choose the third pathway of BTR, Binding Technical Review, if you are a manufacturer of excipients or packaging materials or API. You can select this pathway of BTR. For that, you need to fix your customer as drugs application firstly. So you cannot do this independently. You are dependent from the application process of the drugs, and therefore we call it the binding technical review, binding your product as AEP and the final drugs products application. And firstly, you will get an inactive DMF number and from NMPA after you submit your application dossier to NMPA, and then you can issue a letter of authorization to your drugs customer, and then the drugs customer can integrate your DMF number into their application dossier of drugs and submit to NMPA for the market approval. And when the drugs will be approved finally, your DMF will be also approved automatically, and you will receive an active DMF number. And with this active DMF number, you can then authorize this number to all the other drugs manufacturers who want to enter Chinese market.
Yeah, Ning, thank you. And one thing I would also add is that we have received some customer interest and done some work recently about some very high tech ingredients to APIs, particularly in cell and gene therapy area, who may not technically fall within some of these BTR or China Drug Master Filing categories, but we are in any case still seeking that we and have in fact been in discussion with the CDE of NMPA about implementing and undertaking a confidential filing so that such importing manufacturers can still protect their confidential information to their end API manufacturer customer within China. So this is quite an interesting development, and there is some flexibility here. Ning, is there anything else to add on that point?
Yes, you are right. And so even if your products are not, so to say, the AP products, which can be directly filed as a DMF to NMPA here in China, you can still protect your intellectual property through submitting your application documents directly to NMPA with the help of your China partner directly. But In order to achieve that, you need to pay attention that your application dossier need to be submitted directly after the submission of the drugs dossier. And in the drugs dossier should be the customer should put a note in their drug dossier that this and that product information of this will be submitted by the supplier separately and directly to NMPA. So for that, you need a coordination with the manufacturer and speaking to NMPA firstly to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you. And so, we would encourage manufacturers not to take it face value. Sometimes, we do get this question. Drug manufacturers say, "Hey, you need to provide all your information to us," but that is not the case. That's the key message, is that China does have a drug master filing process, and there is some flexibility there. And so please examine it more closely.
Hamish, I have seen an interesting question from Birgit Langvost. What is the advantage to go with an API where BTR, binding technical review, and not independent approval process? So it's a very good question, and the advantage there are some advantages indeed, and one main advantage is that the process of binding technical review is normally shorter and simpler than an independent approval process, because for a binding technical review, the focus of the NMPA auditors is the drugs, not the API product. So API is only part of the drugs dossier by the binding technical review. But by an independent approval process, if you choose this pathway, then your product is a focus, and everything must be perfect, so to say. And the NMPA reviewers could, bring up many deficiency points that they find during independent approval process, which they could ignore if you choose a pathway of BTR, because such kind of information can be found in the dossier of the drugs, for example. So there are some advantages indeed, and of course, independent approval process has also advantage against the BTR. So we could discuss the details and how to choose different pathways maybe in the next session.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Ning. Yeah, let's keep moving, and just to talk now about the key steps of the drug master filing process. So we've set up 7 broad steps here, including the post-market steps. We start with the document preparation and checking before there's a gap analysis. A gap analysis, which we would generally conduct versus your US or EU or other jurisdiction dossier, and then we assist to close the gaps. Ning, could you take over for the subsequent steps just to provide a bit more detail about the process, please?
Yeah, when we close the gaps and we finish the dossier, and then we submit the dossier to NMPA, and so normally in 2 to 3 weeks, we will get the inactive filing number if there is no deficiency points found out by NMPA. And after that, we will go into the phase of technical review or binding technical review with the drugs. And at last we will get an active filing number, which can be used for all the other Chinese customers. And especially for API products, you also need to pay attention to post-market surveillance.
Thank you, Ning. And just here's a slide with a bit more detail and breakdown of the timeline itself. So we mentioned the file checking list, then followed by the registration form and pre-DMF number, which has approximately 5 months for excipients or packaging, or 8 months API timeline. For active pharmaceutical ingredient. The gap analysis, it takes a few weeks, as Ning mentioned, before the dossier is submitted to the CDE. Then you would obtain the status I, which is indicated on the NMPA website, and I'm going to show you shortly what that looks like. There's then a review process which differs depending on whether it's a BTR or independent approval process. Technical review takes 6 months for independent review and up to 12 months for a bundle technical review before you receive the status A approval. The total timeline is relatively broad because, of course, for bundle technical review, it also depends on the parallel process with the drugs. And here's a slide showing what the platform looks like online. You can see that there's even a total of the existing API filing items, of which over 15,500 are in total filed, with over 11,500 active. And for excipients, there are over 5,000 total, with 2,500 active, and 13,000 packaging material filing items in total, with nearly 7,000 active as of February this year. There is some other information we've just set out on the slide, which breaks down the online form system that you can find with the CDE. It's all in Chinese, of course. And here's to show in a bit more detail about the status I versus the status A for the online system. As mentioned, status I means you have passed the completeness review and ready for technical review, while status A means that the technical review has been passed and the API or excipients or packaging is finally approved for sales. Here's a broad material checklist for your submission dossier. We won't go into detail now, given the timing, but if you have specific requests about what documentation you need to provide, then please ask us or follow up after the session, or we can go into more detail about it with specific requests in the roundtable session that I've mentioned earlier, coming up in 2 weeks. Just to maybe very briefly mention that API follows more the standard module format of the CTD, while excipients and packaging have more specific limited documentation requirements. Okay, in the last minute or two of our presentation before we hand back to Serica, we're just going to speak very briefly about the local representative, which is required as part of the dossier submission. So importing manufacturers must be represented by a local entity in China. There are 3 broad options. The first is the distributor, the second or local partner, the second is a own subsidiary, or the third is an independent consulting firm. We act in this role for many of our customers. What are the advantages of each? We've just set out some points here on the slide. Ning, would you like to speak a little bit more about the pros and cons?
Yes, thank you very much. Before speaking about this slide, I want to mention there is another question from Addison Jarvis. For a container closure system, if the CCS manufacturer and API manufacturers are 2 different companies, should the CCS manufacturer follow a BTR route? Yeah, most probably. But we, in this way, in this case, we recommend you to do a checking firstly to make sure that the CCS, the container closure system, is neat DMF filing, follow BTR route as a pharmaceutical packaging system. It's also possible. There's also a chance that such kind of CCS could be judged as even as a medical device here in China. So we strongly recommend you to do a checking firstly to make sure which regulatory pathway is a correct one before you start your project. And back to the China legal agent pros and cons, as you can see, Hamish has explained there are 3 options. So they have their pros and cons, like if you choose your distributor as your legal agent and submit your application to MPA. So the pros are low cost, less effort, and short-term entry. But the cons is you could leak your intellectual property, and you could lose your independency because you are dependent from the distributor, who is the only communication channel to Chinese authorities on behalf of you. And if you choose your own subsidiary, then there are also pros and cons. Like for pros, you can protect your IP in a good way. You get better control. But on the other side, you need to invest a lot to start to register a company here in China, and to build up a regulatory affairs team for the submission and post-market surveillance, all the necessary activities here in China. And of course, you have also continuing operation management costs. And if you choose an independent legal agent, independent consulting company as your legal agent, like CICIMA, so the pros are that there's no interest conflict, because we are not getting involved in the sales and distribution activities at all. And you are independent from your distributors, and you have an experienced post-market surveillance team by us, because we are now dealing with post-market surveillance for many of our customers as foreign manufacturers. And the cons, of course, we charge a service fee, which is not very high, of course.
And there are exactly the PMS process and the ongoing quality requirements which are needed as part of, as part of the legal agent role. Okay, so that's enough about our presentation, and now we would like to pass back to Benjamin to finish us off in the last 10 or 15 minutes, and he's going to talk about some broader tips about market entry.
So we're going to Serica. My background, I've been in China for almost 10 years. My specialization is in cross-border M&A, joint ventures, and capital investment. So I lead all sort of the key commercial engagements that we undertake in China. So this presentation will have a pretty strong sort of commercial edge. So before we start looking at sort of different modes of entry, which you can see, greenfield, licensing, M&A, and joint ventures, we thought it'd be a good idea to kind of remind people of some of the key challenges you'll face and some of the difference in sort of the general commercial environment in China, which is quite different to what we're used to in the West. So the first key challenge, cultural barriers. I think language is one that everyone's familiar with, but the business culture and the contrasting sort of professional practices often make converting very positive, very kind meetings into something tangible. The next, a high cost. So contrary to popular belief, China is not a cheap country to operate in, particularly in tier 1 cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, and even more so if you're a technology or STEM company. Next is talent. I'd probably say this is probably one of the most underestimated challenges. All the largest companies in China, both domestic and foreign, are locked in a very intensive battle for acquiring strong local talent. And if you are to succeed here, you will need local people. And lastly, insulated ecosystems. So this is largely unknown, even by many sort of market veterans. China has many ecosystems. Seemingly, they seem unconnected, but they're actually highly integrated across the country. So at Serica, we call them ecosystem clusters, and they are absolutely essential into understanding the market and how you can integrate within it and ultimately be commercially successful. So I do want to elaborate on that a little bit for you. So this is the sort of classic sort of Western ecosystem. You can see each layer is clearly separated from the other. There's limited communication with the core business taking a passive role. So in short, it's rigid, it's linear, and static in nature. But in China and indeed other countries in East Asia, it's a completely different story. The stakeholder roles are mixed and overlap. There's fluid communication between the different levels, and they take a really active role in shaping and growing out the ecosystem. So it's agile, it's flexible, and it's fluid in nature. So what does that look like in real terms? So here's an example from Alibaba's enormous ecosystem. And these are some of the benefits that it can provide. So, you know, if you're a member of the ecosystem, you're going to be able to acquire local resources faster. You're going to be able to safeguard and repel competitors. It's going to keep you safe against any kind of foul play. And this is where a lot of the famed China speed and flexibility comes from. It's not from the company as an individual, it's from a group of companies as a collective. And that's one of the key competitive advantages that they have domestically, but also globally as well. So for you, you have to really, really work hard on trying to integrate yourself within it. Maybe some of you have been in the Chinese market. Perhaps you've struggled to sell, you know, better quality solutions. Maybe you even did it at a loss, but you found that local companies with inferior products and solutions kind of beat you to the punch. And, you know, that obviously leave many of you understandably perplexed. So hopefully this will sort of enlighten you a little bit more and kind of set up what we're going to talk about going forward. So greenfield. So that would be where you make a new subsidiary that you operate independently. That would often be a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, often dubbed a WOFE. And it can provide you excellent control and big returns, but it does come with high upfront costs and a long time for the ROI. So on the left side, you can sort of see what the very basic process looks like. Of course, please refer to Hamish and the rest of the team on how you can plot out your path to regulatory approval. But we mainly show this just to show the actual upfront costs. So on the right, which excludes a lot of the DFI filings and other regulatory approval, you can see the cost in a tier 1 city for a very small, simple team. An incorporation is in fact very high. It's approximately $375,000 US dollars. And that's before any rent, any marketing, or other kind of operational costs. So, you know, bottom line, while you'll stand to benefit from really strong returns in the long term, the upfront costs, there's high risks, there's operational complexities that really make this suitable only for companies with deep pockets, really strong capabilities, and a long-term sort of horizon. So I'd typically avoid this option for any company that hasn't raised at least a B round in investment. However, though, there is one way some of you could reduce the initial upfront costs, and that's applying to different regional governments within China for favorable policies or economic incentives. So they're pretty generous and they're specifically designed for foreign innovators coming into the market. So they can include grants, R&D credits, tax subsidies, free lab space, free office space, can even help you with recruitment and potentially even assist you with regulators as well if you have any issues. Now, of course, these incentives, they do vary from region to region, city to city, district to district. And often what's promised and what you actually get are often quite different, but they are very useful if you can get them. Our firm, Serica, we were one of the first non-publicly listed foreign firms in Hangzhou to receive these policies. So we've got a lot of personal experience with this, as well as helping a handful of clients go through this process as well. We won't get into it now, but this is something that we can expand on in more detail at the roundtable in early June. So yeah, so once again, remember the key kind of pros and cons, right? High reward, good control, faster decision making, but it's risky, it's expensive, and it's very complicated to pull off. What advice could we provide? I think the first is localize. You heard Matthew sort of mention this early on. Your business model, the way you recruit, the way you train, the way you manage, the way you facilitate decision making between the HQ and the subsidiary is essential. Prioritize recruitment as early as possible. You know, finding a really good GM is very difficult and takes a long time, but when you get the right one, it can be a real game changer. Of course, understand your path to regulatory approval, and that's what Cassima's all about. And kind of manage your own expectations a little bit as well. Look, there isn't a silver bullet for China. There's no, you know, fast, cheap, risk-free way of doing business here. Everything takes a little longer, and everything's a little bit more expensive than you might expect. So plan accordingly. So moving on to licensing. So this is a pretty swift, low resource intensive method to develop yourself new revenue streams, albeit limited revenue streams and at the cost of control. This is what the process looks like, and I think any of you who wants the deck, you can study that later. I won't go into too much detail because I think any of you that chooses this option, you're going to be using outside advisors, like consultants like ourselves, as well as you know, reputable legal counsel. So looking at the sort of the kind of key pros and cons here, you know, it is very quick to do. I think this is especially useful if you're a company with limited resources. Maybe you're already expanding to, say, the US, and you're putting a lot of your time and your energy and your efforts into that market. This could be a great swift way of getting additional revenue, which you could use to grow domestically or in other markets, or set up and come back to China properly for something more ambitious down the line. But it does come with quite a few risks. I think the first is a real lack of control over your technology and your product. And ultimately, there are different ways you can mitigate those risks, but they would exist. And of course, quite a complex deal structure as well. It's quite difficult pricing up a licensing agreement that both parties are happy with. I think ultimately, you know, the motivations and benefits for both parties are contrary to the other person's interests and motivations. And if you don't have existing relationships or experience, that can be real difficult to do. And of course, that could, if done poorly, risk creating a competitor in the market as well, once the IP protection has run its course. So what are the advice that we'd offer? You know, ensure your IP is protected, really work with a reputable law firm with experience in the Chinese market. We'd recommend, you know, firms like Denton's, like Linklaters, to help you through that process. Conduct your own due diligence. You know, you don't need to be a corporate investigation firm to be able to do this. There's a lot of really good publicly available information that you can use to get a better understanding of the prospective licensor. Be conscious of the deal structure. I think a lot of people focus very much on deal terms rather than the structure of the deal itself. And ultimately, that's what's going to safeguard you and give you continuous benefits. And lastly, you know, treat them as a partner, you know, nurture that relationship. China's a very relationship orientated business culture. Keep working with them, keep supporting them, maintain that relationship. That'll keep that licensing agreement on track, and it would likely open up other more lucrative business opportunities for you down the line. So next up, we have M&A, specifically buy-side acquisitions, which actually we're going to skip over today. I think this option's typically for large multinationals or perhaps very successful unicorns. And I think considering the bulk of the audience today, a scale up in SMEs, and of course we have time constraints, we'll skip this out. But on the off chance any of you are listening that are interested in this, please let us know before the roundtable and we can prepare something in more detail for that day. So next up, joint ventures and strategic alliances. So this is really available for almost all kind of companies, regardless of your shape and size, and kind of gives you a lower risk, a lower cost way of getting immediate market access when you compare it against an acquisition. But there are quite a few challenges involved in pulling this off successfully. So this is kind of what the process looks like. I'm not going to give you a crash course in joint ventures and strategic alliances today. I prefer to focus on some of the different sort of practical advice. So the key pros and cons. So it's generally much lower cost and lower risk than other forms of inorganic growth or indeed a greenfield operation. I think with the right support, you can get set up in sort of 6 to 12 months. They're pretty quick to execute. And I think one of the biggest benefits is there's access to the local resources. I think ultimately most cross-border joint ventures and strategic alliances, regardless of the market, kind of typically work in the same way. So the new entrant into the market, they focus on kind of delivering the solutions, and the local partner kind of handles the government, the business development, and other sort of operational matters like that. But depending on your goals and offerings, co-development and co-promotion agreements, and of course, collaborative R&D agreements are also sort of great options. But given the various challenges for China, this is typically something that many don't consider early on. They typically look to greenfield or to tech licensing. So we often like to direct people here based on their own resources. So, what are the issues? It can be very, very challenging to source and negotiate the right deal structure. But I'd probably say the largest challenge is actually post-deal, and it's that post-deal integration that causes most cross-border joint ventures with China to fail or at least not live up to expectations. So I think companies have to really think about first how they're going to leverage the ecosystem, understanding and mapping that out. So how will your entrance into the market and your partnership with this company affect the broader market for better or worse? Really looking at your prospective partner to assess their reputation, their finances, their capabilities before progressing. And this isn't necessarily, that there's something done in bad faith, but is there interest in you? Is it mission critical? Is it a strategic priority? Or is it just a side project that actually has minimal drive internally? Focusing on alignment early on, similar to tech licensing, I think a lot of people, they focus too much on deal terms early on. Who invests what? Who gets what? What does that look like? Rather than really focusing on the scope, the objectives, the model, and what an exit might look like down the line. So really focus, I'd probably say 60 to 65% of your time in that area. Integrate from the top down. So get your C-suite involved. It's very, very hard to get a cross-border joint venture unless the C-suite from both sides, or at least a handful of those members, are directly involved in both the formation, but also the operations. And lastly, invest in governance, hiring good lawyers, getting decent non-executive directors and advisory boards to kind of help shepherd your joint venture or strategic alliance forward will make the world of difference. So to summarize, each of these have their own strengths and weaknesses. So while greenfield, will offer lucrative long-term rewards, it is expensive, it's high risk, and it's operationally complex. So only do it if you really have the capital, resources, and frankly, energy to put into it. In contrast to that, licensing, it's fast, it's low intensive to execute, but has limitations on revenue. And if done poorly, presents a series of dangerous risks. Acquisitions, high risk, high cost, but when done well, they deliver immediate market access, revenue generation, and innovation development opportunities. But again, only for ambitious unicorns and multinationals with a long-term horizon and deep pockets. And lastly, joint ventures and strategic alliances, relatively low cost, low risk, and swift way to penetrate the market that the majority of companies can do. But again, needs to be planned and executed well. And the post-deal integration in particular will require considerable resources and time to keep that venture on track. So any of these modes, you can find success. I think a constant that some of you have noticed for this event and other events is speakers recommending to take the time to understand the market and that path to regulatory approval, localizing your approach, leveraging partnerships. I'd echo all of those points once again. Any of you like to get in touch to talk all things Chinese healthcare, welcome to email me or add me on LinkedIn. I hope to see as many of you as possible at the Chinese Healthcare Roundtable that we'll do early next month. And thank you very much for all your time and attention, and best of luck on your China journey. Thanks very much.